Greetings, fantasy football aficionados. We are going to talk a little bit about 32-team dynasty league. It was called Madden Style before I even became a commissioner, and they were basically trying their best, I think, to emulate the season-long mode, franchise mode, if you will, of Madden. I ended up as the Steelers. I have done one video already where I talked a little bit about the rookie draft and, roster setup and stuff like that. But now you might ask yourself, well, then what's left on May the 18th for us to talk about? Well, we came across a couple of setup scenarios that I wanted to talk to you about. And this is the difference between what I'm doing fantasy football wise on YouTube and what maybe, ESPN or Roto World or anybody else is talking about their, rankings and their sleepers and their, whatever. I'm a huge believer in you should actually have a pretty solid idea of, your own rankings. You can use other people's as a point of reference, but you should always agree or disagree, pick by pick, frankly, where you think players should go. So I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is give you some nuts and bolts as far as if you're on Sleeper and you're wanting to run one of these kinds of leagues, or maybe even any kind of league, there are some better ways, some best practices, if you will, to do this. So we were putting together this franchise mode Madden style league on Sleeper, and we came across the idea of, okay, how are we going to do our playoffs? If you know Sleeper, they only do 8 playoff spots. You can, if you're willing to put the work in, you can put some manual scheduling together for the weeks leading into the 8-team bracket that Sleeper provides, and then it allows you to have more playoff teams, basically, if you want to, but it is a little more labor intensive. So for one thing, since I'm commissioner of this league, I'm totally fine with putting some time and effort into it. That's not a problem. And that's, I guess, maybe rule number one. You're only going to get out of your fantasy leagues what you put into them. So if you're willing to do a little bit of work, they'll tend to be pretty much more fun, if that makes sense. So we started talking about how we're going to work out our playoffs and how we're going to work out our schedule. Number one, or I guess then now this would be number two, if you're going to do a divisional format, then everyone must play their division opponents at least once, but frankly, it should probably be twice, because that's the point of divisions. Then, if you're only going to have division winners make it, it makes sense a little bit. But the problem, of course, is you can have 2 really, really good teams in the same division, and maybe one of them should go in as a wild card, which is kind of the way the NFL does it. So here's kind of the format we came up with and the scheduling we came up with. And I'm going to get real into the minutia of how to put this together. Number one, well, I guess now we're on number 3. You have to wait till the NFL schedule comes out, because you absolutely need to know when teams are on buys. If you don't know when the teams are on the buys, then this is not going to work. Because what you're going to do in theory is you're basically just going to schedule the teams that are on a bye in real life against each other in fantasy. We did also take a vote, and we're going to decide that all those games are just going to end as 0-0 ties. So whatever points are scored that week, we're just going to, doesn't matter, you just tie. But if you try and do this without knowing the bye weeks, you pretty much, you're throwing dust in the wind. It's just going to go away, and you're going to have to redo it. So the NFL schedule did come out last week, and we do have the bye weeks. And so I'm not going to pull up the whole schedule, but I am going to show you here the bye weeks for in real life and how this kind of looks for the franchises. And so what you're going to do, just for example, week 9, you're going to have the Steelers play the Titans. And then that way that works out to a tie, because you're going to have to manually adjust it. But then, since I am the Steelers and most of my players are Steelers, I do not intend to have a very good week that week. I would imagine the same goes for the Titans. If he's got all his players off, then we shouldn't have this outlier week where, we can't fill all our starting spots and all that. So those two will play each other. It'll be kind of a tie. In fact, not kind of a tie. It'll be exactly a tie. Week 8, you can have the Texans play the Saints and the Giants play the Niners. And then that way the ties, in the end, when everyone's had their bye week, it'll kind of work out. So there is a little bit of an exception to all this in that number. You'll notice week 11 has 6 byes, and week 13 has 4, and week 14 has 2. There is no week 12 in the bye week, and I'm actually going to utilize that in our schedule. I put a proposal out there as commissioner, and it got seconded, and so it's all going to come together. So the next thing we decided was we didn't necessarily want just the division winners to make the playoffs, to make the 8-team bracket. If you have 8 divisions and you have 8 winners, then they go to the 8 bracket. And again, you can have your second or third best team not make the playoffs just because they're in a division with another very good team. So here's what we're going to do. Number one, we decided we're going to keep the division setup, which I do think does lend itself to some convenience as far as scheduling and as far as figuring out standings and tiebreakers and that sort of thing. You'll notice that there's no byes in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the real life NFL. So what we decided to do was, in our fantasy schedule, we were going to set up division matchups for weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, if you do the math, and there's 4 teams in every division, then you know that it takes 6 weeks to get all of your division matchups done. My goal was, let's just get the first 4 done early, and then it's easier later on. And it did turn out to be a lot easier later on. So week 1, we just scheduled up everybody's first division matchup. In fact, I think we even matched, if the Steelers played the Ravens as their first division game in real life, then that was their first division game in week 1. Then, once we got week 1 completed, we decided, well, why don't week 4 just be a repeat of week 1? Because then you've got 2 division weeks knocked out. And it's easy because they're going to have to play each other anyway twice, and so there you go. So then we did week 2 was the second matchup, and week 3 was the last matchup, at least as the schedule went. Now you've got a little bit of difficulty in that if you are trying to set up your division matchups and now teams are on a bye. So for example, week 5, the Panthers are playing the Chiefs in our bye week schedule. So they can't have a division matchup that week. Well, what I decided to do was go ahead and use week 5 as basically a repeat of week 2, with the exception of Panthers, Chiefs, and their divisional game. So whatever game that came up to in week 2 for Carolina and Kansas City, that game did not appear in week 5. Then what I did was use week 9, since there were only 2 teams on bye, Steelers and Titans, as a repeat of week 3. And so I got all the divisional matchups in there except for the Steelers matchup and the Titans matchup. Once I did all that, and it actually fell into place pretty easily, I only had a few other games to make up. So what I decided to do was just go to week 6. None of these teams, obviously are on a bye that week because they've already, at least the Chiefs and Panthers aren't on a bye week 6 because they already had their bye. And Steelers Titans didn't have their bye week 6 because they have it week 9. So I just went to week 6. And the first thing I did was I scheduled the Bengals against the Lions, the Dolphins against the Vikings because they're on a bye. Then I scheduled the Chiefs against their division opponent, the Panthers against their division opponent, same with the Steelers and same with the Titans. Then I just kind of randomly filled in the rest of the schedule for week 6. And guess what? By week 6, we have almost all of our division matchups done with the exceptions of the ones that need to happen on week 9. So those got all of our division matchups done. Everything else was kind of random. I did go through everybody's schedule and see if there were any weird repeats, and there were. Like, for example, the Bengals played the Giants twice just because of happenstance and the way, things got switched around. So I went through and kind of tweaked some of that stuff and made sure that there weren't any weird repeats. And we had, basically, by week 11, we had an 11-week schedule where everybody played their division opponents twice and some random opponents in the other 5 weeks. So that was the way that worked. Then, this is the cool part, I think. After week 11, we are going to take the the bottom four teams in each conference, AFC and NFC, and we're going to end their season. So out of 32 teams, 8 teams are done after week 11. Then, all the division winners, and we will have a little bit of a weird standings formula, because some teams will not have had their bye by week 11. We've got some 13 and some 14 here. So if they are in play as far as their division, then we'll have to probably go straight to division record and forget overall record, because some of these guys have had an extra game, basically. But in week 12, all of the division winners, as decided at that time, will get a bye. The other 16 teams, which basically will be the 16 teams in the middle. We take away the bottom 8, we take away the top 8. Those 16 teams will be seeded 1 through 8 in each conference, and they will play a 1-week wild card. The winners of week 12 then will advance to weeks 13 and 14, which we'll talk about in a second, against their division winners, and again will reseed based upon conference and based upon division winners get the top 4 seeds, wild cards get the bottom 4 seeds, and that sort of thing. So once you get through week 11, you only have 24 teams left. Once you get through week 12, you only have 16 teams left. And then weeks 13 and 14, depending on, again, who has had their bye and who hasn't. If I'm playing the Ravens, I only get a week 14 matchup against the Ravens, because they have a bye week 13. So I just get to sit and wait, which is fine. And then winner of week 14 is going to advance, and the loser of week 14 is going to go home. If you are not playing a team that is off week 13 or 14, then you actually get both weeks to total for your matchup. So you get a 2-week matchup to try and get into the final 8. And to me, that's pretty fair. Because again, you're seeded. You're probably, if you did real well all season, you're playing against a team that's going to struggle to beat you 2 weeks in a row, that sort of thing. So you end up with a 2-week playoff among the final 16 teams. Once week 14 concludes and you have your 8 winners, you put those in the 8-team bracket that Sleeper provides for week 15, and then you just play it out 15, 16, 17 championship. So that would be your scheduling for your 32-team Madden Style Franchise Mode Sleeper League. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about trades. As it relates to trades, you need to have something put in writing from the very beginning. So that's one of the reasons, again, I moved my configuration here on the OBS Studio, is so that I can show over here the pinned messages that I have put as basically kind of the constitution or the rules of the league. That one could actually be unpinned right there. But here was my outline. So if you want to pause your YouTube video or whatever, as far as how the playoffs were going to work and stuff, this did not get into the nuts and bolts as far as how to put the schedule together, but it does do pretty much the week-by-week accounting of how the games are going to go. So there's a couple of little weird wild card issues in that if you have a team that's doing really well, but they have a bye week on 13 or 14, then that's going to affect that one matchup, that one period. Ideally, you have a situation where all the teams have pretty cut and dried, standing wherever they rank, if you will, and nobody needs to necessarily be on a bye week 13 and 14. If the bottom 8 teams if perhaps some of those teams have a bye 13 and 14, that helps you. And if the well, really, that's all that helps you. now that I mention it, because if anybody above those 8 has a bye on the 13 or 14, it's going to affect things. But it can still be done. Is the thing, and I think the seeding is the important aspect of all this, because if you do well all season, you are rewarded by playing a lower seeded team. And in most cases, you're going to be able to beat that team. And especially, number one, if you're a division winner, you're getting a bye. And then number 2, you have a 2-week matchup. So they have to beat you over 2 weeks. And that eliminates some of those fluky type situations. And we do keep everything divided AFC, NFC, so that in the end, you do have one AFC team and one NFC team playing in your Super Bowl. So there was the way that was going to line out. I wanted to show you the commissioner's note that I had posted, and apparently on the PC it will not show it, which is a little unfortunate. But I do have it here on my phone in front of me, so I'll just kind of read off what I put. Here's the scenario that came up. While I was doing all of that playoff talk and while I was doing all that scheduling, there was a trade that slipped through and processed. And the current settings for this league, which by the way were made before I took over as commissioner, were such that 8 vetoes were required to veto a trade. This trade processed, and it had 2 yes votes and 5 vetoes. The 2 yes votes, by the way, were the 2 people who agreed on the trade. Now, in my mind, we should have checked that beforehand, and based upon the rules and the settings as they were at that time, there was nothing illegal about that trade. But there was an uproar about we should not have allowed that to process. We should reverse it because there were more vetoes than yes votes, which makes sense to me. By the time I counted the 5 vetoes and by the time I counted how many people said it should be reversed, we actually did have 8 vetoes. So what I did as a commissioner, again, and without the help of these other commissioners who have just apparently checked out, I reversed the trade. And then I put out there, I said, what is specifically the process we should have for these trades? Now, I'm in some leagues where, I'll be honest with you, we don't have a review committee. We don't have a review period. We don't have veto power. A trade is a trade. And they just go through. And then you just live with it. I like that. I think everyone should be responsible. However, in a 32-team league, there's going to be some perhaps who shouldn't. And by the way, if I can find, shouldn't process those trades. And if I can find the trade, I'll show it to you. This was the solution that we came up with, and I implemented it immediately. And we've already had a trade come through that followed this criteria. Trades with 5 or more pass votes to veto votes pass immediately. So if it goes to 5 pass, 0 veto, it passes. If it goes to 6-1 or 10-5 or whatever, it passes. If it doesn't happen in the allotted time for the trade voting, so in other words, you don't get 5 more passes than vetoes, and ours is 24 hours, then whichever side has more votes wins, which in this case would have been the veto side, because it had 5 vetoes to 2 yes votes. But again, we hadn't looked at it because we were dealing with other things. We did put in here that tie votes will still pass. So if it's 4-4, then it'll pass. If it gets to 8 vetoes, that is an automatic veto, which to me sounds like a lot. I would have probably made that 4, but nobody wanted to change it, and I didn't want to argue. So basically, it's kind of hard for a trade now to get vetoed, which is the way it should be to me, really. We can take a look at that trade. In fact, let's just look on the league chat here. It may not show that either. Okay, this is the one that we processed. And it's a pretty big trade, and it does involve a lot of the same pieces as the one that got vetoed. I think the biggest piece that's not in here is Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey was going to go to this side over here, Tenzo, and a lot of people felt like that wasn't really fair. In my opinion, it's a 29-year-old running back with an injury history, so it didn't really affect things as much as other people thought it did, in my opinion. So anyway, so the trade that got reversed had CMC in it. This is the one that got processed, and it went 8-0 or something. It went. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. There were no vetoes. I think it might have even been 9-0 pass. So, for the most part, I think that's fair. Again, the problem was, and here is the one. Here's all the corrections. If you're looking at the chat as I scroll through it here, that was when everything got reversed. Which, by the way, as commissioner, that's kind of a pain, kind of a pain, really, to go and reverse those things. So that's why you want something kind of written down that will. Here's the trade that was processed, and that is not exactly what I wanted there. There's Christian McCaffrey. And I guess it's not going to show it to me on a different pop-up. But basically, here's what the trade looked like, and it processed with a 5 veto to 2 approval vote, which in our settings was it took 8 vetoes to veto, and anything less than that, it passed. And we tweaked it a little bit. So these are things that you need to have, and I put them in the commissioner note, which frankly I pinned. When you're on your phone, you can see it. But if you're on your PC, apparently you can't necessarily see it. So I wonder if... Yeah, it doesn't even give me the option to look at it as the commissioner. So this league looks pretty fun. I got to be honest with you. I put together, I feel like, a pretty good roster, considering I have only Steelers to start with. And then I have picked up, I think, some decent building pieces. Specifically... went and picked up King, a rookie quarterback, Carolina. Nussmeier, rookie quarterback for Kansas City. This is a pretty big stretch here. This McAllister guy, he's not even signed by anybody, and he's injured, so we'll see how that goes. But also Peyton, rookie quarterback for Philadelphia. So we got some pieces here for when Aaron Rodgers finally decides to hang him up. I'm still a little bit of a believer in Will Howard, although I'm kind of excited to see what Drew Allar can do. And I don't have Allar, I think, on this team. I think someone else sniped him from me. So, anyway, so that was a little nuts and bolts as far as 32-team dynasty. If you're trying to do franchise mode, where everyone just grabs a franchise. And I do have, if you've seen other videos, I have 2 different leagues where I am the Steelers. This is the one where I held pat and didn't really trade much. And then I have another one that... I did trade a lot, and there'll be updates on both. Most of these football teams are going into mothballs, though, until August, September. I've got a couple of rookie drafts still going, though, so when those wrap up, I'll give you some more updates. Till then, y'all stay safe out there.